All right, folks, welcome everyone to the sixth COVID-19 happy hour presented by the Sullivan Center for Principal Entrepreneurship at Catholic University. We're delighted tonight to have Anthony Ackil of Streetlight Ventures join us. Anthony has a unique perspective on landlord-tenant relationships, having represented both sides as a part of his career with Streetlight and before as a co-founder of Be Good in New England. So Anthony has partnered with us and with the Inner City Capital Connections program that we host each year. Has presented on panels regarding capital access and creative solutions to the capital question for small businesses, and also on the first annual Capital Access Expo that we hosted in February. So he is a friend of the Sullivan Centers and really a trusted advisor who we're bringing in to talk about how businesses should approach May 1st on the horizon. For a lot of people, this will represent the second month since their business was changed, and try to help us all understand a little bit better all sides of that equation. So it's not just each individual business and their individual needs, that in the nature of a true partnership, there has to be understanding on both sides in terms of how the landlord business is being affected in addition to the way that the business itself is being affected. In addition, we have Michael Lester, who has participated in a couple of these calls already, and he is also another local influence in the real estate market, commercial real estate, where he can help elucidate some of these questions as well. But before we get to each of them, I just want to give, for anybody who might be unfamiliar with the Sullivan Center, a very quick overview of what we do. As I mentioned, my name is Brian Becker, and I am the Director of Small Business Outreach at the Sullivan Center for Principal Entrepreneurship. The basic idea is that by providing value to local business owners, and then including our students in that process, that both the business owners win as well as our students in terms of their experience gathered. So though none of us asked for this opportunity, as you can imagine, the COVID-19 crisis has presented a teachable moment for our students in ways that we could have possibly imagined. And yet, I think our heart is truly with small businesses and their success in our area. And I think that everyone's heart is bleeding a little bit now, just understanding not only the short, but now what is becoming increasingly clear will be the long-term effects of what's taking place around us. So Anthony, if you would just maybe give us a brief introduction to Streetlight Ventures and how you view the landlord-tenant relationship perhaps a little bit differently and creatively, and then also maybe just a couple of trends you're hearing based on the small business support component of your business.
Sure. So thanks for having me, guys. So my background is in restaurants. I started a chain of restaurants when I was 27, and we grew it to about 80 restaurants. It became a bigger company, and about a year and a half ago, I decided I wanted to do something new, something more entrepreneurial. So I put a CEO in place, still involved with that business, but started a business called Streetlight. Streetlight is really focused on helping small entrepreneurs. I think they're small business entrepreneurs. I think there's really 4 areas where every entrepreneur needs help. So number 1 is real estate, finding good real estate, being smart about it, looking at data, looking at demographics, actually, being smart about where you should open your business. Number 2 is finance. So I think every small business lacks, like really financial reporting, budgeting, pro forma, executional financial rigor. So we offer services around executional finance. Marketing, we offer executional marketing services to small businesses where we will take over social and digital execution for small businesses. And then we offer capital, facilitation services where, as most people know, every small business needs help with capital. So we either look to invest into businesses or we help businesses find loans. So obviously, my business has been extremely affected by the COVID virus. I think every business that we've been working with is really the epicenter of pain in this new environment, this new world we're living in. I think there's some really interesting things around business in this environment. I'm not going to get into all of them, but entrepreneurs are trying to be entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are trying to think. They're trying to react. They're trying to do things differently. I'm seeing some amazing things I'm seeing some really tough things where there's nothing you can do right now. You just gotta get ready for when it gets better. I think in terms of real estate, I think no restaurants I know are paying full rent. Everybody is asking to defer. Everybody's asking for rent abatements. A lot of the bigger companies I'm working with, I'm on the board of a public restaurant company. Nobody's paying rents, so where that goes, I'm not positive. I think there could be some real pushback. There could be some real fight from the landlords. I think there's probably gonna be. I think the question is, what does that mean, right? Like, there's nobody out there renting space right now. Could you be kicked out? Could you have a really tough conversation with your landlord? 100%. I think, but at the same time, you have to survive. So if you have no money coming in, the first place everybody looks to is rent. I've been in situations besides this where my business was not going in the right direction, and we were running out of money. We almost went bankrupt 1,000 times. But the first place I always look first people I don't pay is the landlords. Okay, and I think that sort of feeling has rung true in this crisis, where people are deciding not to pay rent. Again, where does that end? I'm not positive, because landlords are in their own situation. They have mortgages. They have leverage. They have to be able to pay their mortgage to the bank. I'm not positive where it ends. All I can tell you is that that's what I'm seeing. What I would say is that every landlord that I've been speaking with has been willing to work with us. So I think communication is key in this. Talking with your landlords, figuring out what's fair, working with them to figure out a solution through the problem. Every landlord I talk to, except for one, and I've talked to probably about 50, has been somewhat receptive to this idea of rent deferral, rent abatement, paying the minimum now with the idea that we will pay over time. I haven't had one. I've had only one that has really pushed back on that. So I believe everybody is, that I'm talking to, is acting in good faith. And I believe that the best course of action when you're dealing with a landlord is, number one, to have a lot of communication, very upfront, very honest. Don't try to lie, to be very honest, and ask for what you're going to ask for, with the understanding that they have bills to pay as well, and that they may not give you exactly what you're asking for. I've always found that sort of being very upfront, very transparent, in starting communication early is the best way to deal with this type of situation. And I think it is the best way to deal with this crisis. And I do think most landlords will be understanding, and if they're not, just keep pushing until they are. Like, they have to be understanding. So my biggest advice is, number one, start communication early, be very transparent. Don't ask for crazy stuff, but ask with what you can deal with. And then start a dialogue, and start at some level it's a negotiation. But do it in good faith, and do it in a positive way, with the understanding that everybody's in the same boat, and we're all trying to get through what we're all trying to get through.
Thank you. Anthony, could you speak a little bit just in terms of the tension for the landlords themselves between trying to service current tenants, knowing that potentially not all of them are going to remain in business, and then I'm sure the concerns regarding there being a glut of spaces on the market if and when this thing sees itself through, and how they could be motivated potentially to work with some of their existing tenants?
Yeah. So let's take a step back and talk about the businesses first. Okay. So there will be a number of businesses that go out in this crisis, go out of business. 100%. It's going to happen. What I'm telling, I have a lot of businesses that are coming to me and be like, hey, I think I should quit. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go get a job. I'm not going to be an entrepreneur anymore. What I'm telling them is that it's very early right now. Like, this idea of making a rash decision that, hey, I'm not going to do what I love, or it's not ever going to work. We're in the height of a huge crisis that we've never seen. Who's to say that in 6 months things aren't going to get better? Who's to say that guidance changes and all of a sudden, we can actually work and maybe do it in a way that's a little bit, creative. So I'm telling everybody, just take a step back, relax, let's let this play out before making a rash business decision, like just shutting down your doors. Okay. I had a boxing gym came to me last week, and he was like, look, I don't think I can do this anymore. I think I'm out. And what I basically told him was, do you love your business? Do you love being an entrepreneur? Is this what you want to do? And he said, yes. And I said, well, there's no reason to panic right now. Let's see what happens in the next couple months. Let's see if things turn around and make a decision then. I think that's the best advice on the business side I can give is we don't know what this is going to be. So this idea of running to the hills and being like, my business is never going to work in this environment, we're not sure what the environment is. So don't make that decision yet. On the real estate side, there is going to be a humongous amount of opportunity, okay? Like more opportunity than I could ever imagine, okay? For the right types of businesses. There's going to be businesses that go out. There's going to be space that landlords are desperate to fill. You're going to get deals, at least I believe, that you've never thought you could get. You're going to get space that's second generation space that is very easy to build out, where the cost to open is going to be extremely reduced because you don't have to put all this money in to open a business, okay? I recently took over a chain of pizza restaurants for this same purpose. I believe that delivery-focused restaurants are going to thrive, and I believe there's going to be 1,000 opportunities for me to open a very inexpensive restaurant in real estate that I would have never seen. I wouldn't have seen before. For 10 years. So I believe that's a real opportunity, and I'm trying to take advantage of it. There are going to be real opportunities for certain businesses, and I'm not exactly sure what they are yet. But any brick and mortar business will have a huge opportunity from a real estate side. You have to wait, pick your time. I don't think it's yet. I think it's probably in 3 to 6 months, if I was guessing. And I believe that there will be enough pain where there'll be huge opportunity. But your business has to be ready to do that, and you have to make sure that your business is conducive to this environment. Because I'm not positive every business is. I'm not positive until there's a vaccine, until there's, some stability here. Like, would you go out and open a chain of casual dining restaurants focused on a bar? I'm not positive, That being said, I'm actively looking at taking over a chain of casual diners with bar as a component because they'll just give it to me, because they don't want to deal with the situation that we're in. So as an entrepreneur, this is an amazing environment because you're going to be given deals, whether it's business deals or real estate deals, that you've never seen before and you won't ever see again. But with those deals comes a huge amount of risk. There's just going to be a lot of risk. That's sort of how I think about it.
Thank you so much. Michael, do you want to chime in there about what you're seeing in terms of your clients?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. I would echo a lot of what Anthony just said. My perspective is a little different. I actually don't rent any space as a business owner. However, I have some shared office, that sort of thing, which is month to month, very flexible. So my heart goes out to anybody who's sitting on a multi-year lease for space that they currently can't use. My first, I'm mostly in the appraisal world. I do valuation consulting. My first suggestion would be make sure you reread your lease with fresh eyes, depending on who wrote it. And maybe you know it backwards and forwards, but sometimes if you haven't looked at it in a long time, you might see something that you didn't notice that would give you an advantage that you didn't know you had. So I would see if you have an attorney, ask your attorney to give you a free hour to take another look at your lease to see if there's some options in there you didn't understand. I would say landlords that I've talked with are definitely seeing a lot of rent held back, which is understandable. Their position's a little different in the sense that they're, if they do have a mortgage that they have to pay, you're not likely to hear a lot of receptivity about rent abatement simply because their lender isn't going to give them that. You might be able to get them to agree to tack it on to the back end of your lease, what we back in 2008 called Extend and Pretend. So maybe you just kick the can down the road with them and know that you're going to owe rent for a little bit longer than you thought. One thing I would suggest about restaurants, if you've got a landlord who's somewhat flexible or creative, maybe you've got percentage rent, which obviously is on your side, because if your rent is strictly a percentage of your gross, then you don't owe them anything. Most of the leases that I see, though, are structured with a minimal base rent and then something on top of that based on gross sales. I would go back to them and negotiate hard about that. Maybe if you had been successful and you were closing in on a renewal where it would convert to a more traditional base rent, maybe you can convince them to extend that percentage rent situation to your favor. You know, I would say the other thing to keep in mind in a lot of jurisdictions right now, I wouldn't panic because evictions and foreclosures are suspended, at least for the next couple of months. So landlords don't really have any recourse. I mean, where are they going to go try to get you out? Nobody. It's not just for residential properties, it's for commercial properties in a lot of jurisdictions too. And then, you know, the one thing I'll say, just to underscore what Anthony was saying, just as a last point, is that this really is an opportunity if you can hang on, especially in the restaurant space, because so many of the recent deals that have been done in the last 4 or 5 years in retail, I mean, they're almost all restaurants. So if you can be one of the few that makes it by virtue of having a significant carryout trade or whatever it is, you got to understand that you're in a great position to pick and choose your space if you are looking for another option. Because unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of spaces that go dark, and they're all going to be set up mostly as restaurants.
Thank you, Michael. And Anthony, before I let you respond to that, because I think that this is squarely in your wheelhouse in terms of build out costs and potentially how you can change a lot of the numbers based on retrofitting or using second generation space. We also have my very close friend, Sean Sullivan, who's joined us, who's with Finmarc Management, Inc. And full disclosure, John and I have known each other for now over 20 years. And we have a Thursday night call that's a little bit more freewheeling than this one is with our group of friends. But Sean's been talking a lot on that call about his experience in the leasing space and some trends that he's seeing, not specific to restaurants, but in terms of a lot of Main Street retail operations and everything else. So Sean, if you could just give us your perspective, and then we'll go from there.
Hey everybody, yes, this is Sean. Brian and I have known each other a long time, and I promised I'd be on my best behavior. So, yeah, so Brian asked me to join. Finmarc is we manage about 7 million square feet of commercial real estate and actively own probably 4 to 5 million of that 7 million. And I work on the sort of, we'll do a little bit of everything, but I do a lot of our asset management for our existing assets. And as you can imagine, we have a lot of tenants who can't pay rent or not open, or, you know, and so Brian asked me to join to sort of speak to how we're dealing with that. And I've jumped in the call a little bit late, but a lot of the things I've heard are the way we're thinking about that. There are some landlords who are taking a very hard sort of legal line to it. We are not doing that. Our thought is, and we have a lot of, I would call entrepreneurial, you know, businesses, and our thought is, how do we get help our tenants through this? Couple good points I thought were made. Abatement is not really something that's really on the table. We're really sort of structuring on it as a deferral. And the deferral is really for 2 reasons. One, for retail tenants, if you're not, you know, we're not open right now, things are shut down. And the other part of that is to give tenants time, or this was about a month ago, to give tenants time to get in line for PPP money, you know, using resources out there, try to get, because some of that money can go towards rent. So just gives them to take a breath to figure out what the next steps are to sort of navigate this challenging time. That said, we are doing I thought another great point. I don't know the gentleman's name who last is. We are doing extensions to our leases. That's more of a sort of a particular situation, mostly for, I would say, are really well capitalized tenants who've been there for a long time. Maybe they got, there's a parent company behind them that's, got the bandwidth to, sustain through this. And we're giving more abatement in that situation in exchange for more lease term. But, and we get all sorts of questions. Well, like, what if we're not back online then? What if I can't pay my money back by middle of next year? And we have so many tenants and so many asks. The thought is, let's just give everyone 60 or 90 days just to sort of catch their breath. Don't worry about rent. And I think the important thing, at least the way I look at when we're talking to these tenants, is we want to see that our tenants are actually trying to navigate this. I think some people sort of, some people are just opportunistic, like, oh, there's a pandemic. People are just getting less rent, so I'm just going to ask for less rent, even though I'm a moving and storage company and my business isn't shut down, or I'm a construction company and my business isn't shut down. Those situations are a lot more, a lot harder for us to sort of pallet, a rent request or rent deferral. But, we realize that people are closed and they can't pay their rent. They're not sitting on a ton of capital to just sustain through this without being open. And we want to see them, apply for loans. Maybe they didn't get it, or they're in line for the second round, or communication is totally key. We have a saying internally that is, silence is very noisy. And if we're not hearing from tenants, that is kind of the bells are going off that there's a problem. And not that it might not get somewhat, contentious at some point, or we want something that they don't really want to sign off on. And there's always there's a trade-off there, but we're not going after our tenants at this point. The thought is really to work with our tenants to navigate the next, 60, 90, 120 days, so that they can kind of get back on the road to recovery, just like the rest of us.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. I've had a couple of people who have privately messaged me their questions. I think that's a great idea. I know that, this topic is sensitive. And I think that for a lot of folks, they don't want to air their personal situation. So if you just want to send me a private message in the chat, we can put that out there. So one question that came up, and anyone feel free to chime in here. But this one person says, I've emailed my landlord 6 times since mid-March and have asked to talk just to figure it out, to way to work with each other one way or the other. All I'm getting is an email with how much I owe and need to pay. And then they go into some more specific details, but they said they have 4 more years on their lease. For Michael or Anthony or Sean, it seems to me, and this is totally uneducated on my part, that a lot of landlords are having to kind of triage their own problems. And it seems like they're trying to take their full list of clients and say, all right, even if I just do very general terms here of a third, and a third, this third, I don't think I need to worry about. This third that I need to keep an eye on, that I think if times were good, they'd be solid. And this third have always been kind of an issue, and maybe they've struggled to make the rent payments every month and things like that. It seems to me like the lines have moved a lot, and such that this situation as described, 4 years left on the lease, and somebody who is trying to actively communicate with them maybe isn't getting their attention as much because they're not the one that they're most concerned about. Is that accurate, or do you think that that there could be something else going on there?
It could be accurate. I think it also, you could have a landlord that is in trouble themselves. Like, some landlords are very leveraged, and they may not have capital to be able to deal with that. I think it's ridiculous that they won't get on the phone. So I wouldn't pay rent, and I would say, if you want to discuss it, I'm happy to discuss it. I think it has to be more than just a letter. And I would, it depends on your business. Are you dependent on this space? Is this life or death with this space? Do you need this to survive? I mean, no matter what, I would get them on the phone. but you got to think about what their leverage is right now too. No landlord wants to be vacant in the middle of a pandemic. That would be insane. So I would think you would have some leverage. And also, what Michael said is, at least in Boston where I am and in DC, I think you can't kick tenants out. You can't do that. So, I think you have the more leverage than they do, and I would be pretty hard on it. So.
But to your point about communication, at least they've taken that step to try to over communicate in advance, because I think that as Sean made the point, silence, it can be extremely noisy in this scenario, because people that are unwilling to have the conversation, I think that can cause you to characterize them in such a way. Yeah,
and also just as Sean, like most big landlords, like they know what they're going to offer. Like, we will offer you 3 months, 3 months deferral, you pay it off over the next 12 months, next 18 months. Most landlords that I talk to, it's not really a hard negotiation. They're like, okay, this is what we're offering for small businesses. We understand it's tough. We'll give you 3 months of rent deferral. You'll pay it off over the next 18 months. I accept that, because I think that's fair. And if if they're like, I haven't had anybody say you can get a straight deferral. That's true. I haven't had anybody say, a straight abatement. I haven't had anybody say that, but if they're not, I believe that maybe they're trying to play hard, but they will work with you. They sort of have to. So.
Yeah, this is Sean. Not knowing much about the situation, we have so many of these. You are sort of playing triage, but yeah, we've kind of come up with, in the last 30 days, sort of like a rather broad strokes. Obviously, there's unique situations or something we really want to pay attention to, but you may just have a landlord who's got other things going on and they're not focused on it, or they're not sophisticated enough to like think through like, okay, I need to just come up with a plan for all my tenants. It's hard to say. The one thing I would offer, one piece of advice that we always like to see is, we like to see it's always impressive to us or our tenants say, hey, I'm closed. I can't use the space for the next 60 to 90 days. And this is the structure I'm offering. Almost like a more concrete offer, as opposed to like, I can't pay and I don't know when I can pay. That's sort of a more ambiguous statement. If you come up with a concrete, like, I'm offering, and do something, look, I'm obviously on the landlord side, but as a tenant, I would say, look, offer to pay it over 3 years, expect them to come back, but do something that works for you over or the rest of your lease, and just say, I'm deferring for 90 days. I will make it up by the time my lease is over, and then let them come back. At least you then have made a little bit more of a concrete offer. That would be my one suggestion.
I would tack on to that. I agree that's a tough position to be in with the lack of communication, because most of the property owners and some of my attorney clients that represent them, I've been pretty forthcoming about staying in communication. I would say, if you've really done everything you can to reach out and you're not hearing back, I would agree with what Sean said. That kind of puts you in a position to kind of dictate terms. Figure out what you can afford for the rent and just say, this is what I'm putting in escrow. Until I hear back from you, that's what I'm going to do. And that way, down the road, nobody can say that you acted in bad faith.
The person who had the question in general said there are a couple of things that can elucidate more of their story. One is that it's one of the largest landlords in DC that owns half the city. They don't want to name by name, and the business is a fitness studio. So I don't think it's probably necessarily space specific, but that's more of what's going on there. Another question that came up, and unless anybody has any strong opinions about it, I know that we're focused on commercial leases right now. Somebody had a residential question about what their rights were if they're month to month. I should have mentioned this at the outset. For those that are unfamiliar with the DC Pro Bono Law Center, if you just type in DC Bar Pro Bono, they've been running all kinds of workshops that can answer these types of questions. So especially on the residential side, I think we're focused on commercial today. But I know that they did something a couple weeks ago in terms of tenant rights amidst the crisis. I know that evictions are currently suspended. So that's just one one question answered. But then as far as your specific rights from there, I would direct you accordingly. For what it's worth, DC Bar Pro Bono has also done things on employee-employer relations on the HR side. So dealing with some of the kind of stickiness of the difference between layoffs and furloughs and those kinds of things too. So if there's kind of a tenant rights question, I would probably refer you there unless anybody else has an opinion. No. Okay. I know a couple people on the call from talking to them earlier are interested, Anthony, in particular, in the opportunities for new businesses in the food and beverage industry to perhaps take advantage of some of the opportunities that you talked about in terms of second gen space. And just how you think that's going to play itself out with the harsh realization that not every restaurant is probably going to survive this thing. So how might they approach, say, if they were set to open this spring or even sometime later in the year, and now that all this has happened, how do you view their position and how they should approach it moving forward?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So if they have a lease, if you have a lease signed, okay, and you're in the middle of build out or your build out got stalled and you're, you know, waiting to open, it depends on what your business is. If it's delivery focused, I would go forward and try to open. If it is a casual diner, even a fast casual, you know, I would push off trying to open until we have visibility to what happens. And I would take it slow and, you know, see what happens with the business and see what happens with the environment and not try to push to open in the middle of a pandemic, you know. If you have a restaurant or if you're looking for a space, I would wait a month, maybe 2 months. You're going to find a ton of second generation restaurant space that is going to be really interesting. Like, you know, for a Be Good, you know, my business, it cost me about $500,000 to $700,000 to open a restaurant. Okay. So if I was to find a restaurant that had a new hood, new equipment, you know, new grill, new furniture, new paint, new 2 bathrooms, I could cut that price down to $150,000. You know, I used to go around and try to buy up all the old noodles and companies when they went bankrupt, because I could open a noodles and company for $125,000 where it cost $700,000 to open a normal Be Good in a normal space. That's a great thing, right? Like I could save a ton of money and they have good locations. So I think this is the same type of theory. Like if I'm doing this with this pizza shop, like I'm going to go around, and one of the reasons I wanted it was because I want something that I can go around and find all this second generation space, put my delivery focused pizza concept into the space and get basically a free restaurant, you know? So I think there's going to be a ton of opportunities. I think you got to find the right broker, which you could help. Streetlight could definitely help with that 100%. And you got to actually spend the time to weed through the spaces, but you know, and find the right ones. But I think there'll be a lot of opportunity.
Well, if I could chime in there, you know, this world was totally new to me a couple of years ago, and I was surprised, and I guess I shouldn't have been, that some of the most respected restaurateurs and entrepreneurs that I deal with, they always see every space in town, whether or not they're looking. And when you sit down with them and you have a beer or two, like, oh yeah, I've been in that space. Oh really? That's going in there. I've been in that space. It almost becomes habitual for them to be constantly looking for space when they don't need it. And I think that on the one hand, there will be more spaces to look at, but when you're projecting out your next few months, and if you do have eyes for expansion or even your first spot, just recognize that's going to be a significant allocation of your time to be familiar, to understand that, look, every single person who's negotiating the various costs and various structures of these deals, the numbers they were using 3 months ago are just like your business plan got thrown out the window, so did theirs. And so they're going to try to maintain that as much as possible, but trying to predict exactly what rates are going to be right now versus 3 months from now, I think to Anthony's point, you know, prepare now, but just recognize that this is still a very dynamic situation, and educating yourself on the market is going to be, I think, extremely important, especially in the restaurant space, because I think you're right. That day is coming.
I think the other thing is negotiate, like, and get to the point where you enjoy negotiating, because now is the time to try to negotiate, 100%. Don't be shy.
Any other questions from the folks on the call? Either you can unmute yourself, or if you want to put the question into the chat or chat me directly, feel free. While we're gathering some of those questions, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Michael and Anthony and Sean for joining us. I think that our intent with these calls from really when it all started to hit locally here in DC the week before St. Patrick's Day was just to continue to provide value and facilitate conversations about what solutions and best practices we can share. And I think that just like every business has been forced to take a look at their assets and try to figure out what the path forward looks like. In this yoga center, we realized that one of our biggest assets was our ability to gather people and to gather experts in the field and to facilitate conversations. I don't pretend to know everything by any means. I think actually one of my personal competitive advantages is that this is a lot of the small business challenges are not my experience. And yet I rely heavily on folks like Sean and Anthony and Michael to help facilitate the conversations and fill in the blanks. I think that last month, people were starting to talk about what April 1 would mean for their business. Sean, I know you and I talked about, the likelihood of all of your tenants paying and everything else privately. I think now that we're in the second month here, we've exchanged clarity for, I think, a little bit more apprehension, a little bit more anxiety. And I think that if we start projecting out here to the next first of the month, Sean, what do you see moving forward if this were to last locally into June and potentially into July?
Yeah, so, I think for me, and like what we talk about internally is everyone knows we're shut down now, whatever that is, the month of April, part of May. And as jurisdictions think about reopening, I think we always felt like there was the reason why communication is really important, why I think is, yes, we're giving you time now, but it's going to take time for businesses to sort of get back online. And these conversations are, in my mind, somewhat of a fluid thing. We want to continue to help, but then, it's a fine line of are we going to take advantage of and all that. But, as people open up restaurants, are they going to 50% capacity? Do they need to do more carry out? How are gym tenants going to react, and people going to gyms? And I think that is now the bigger question to me is, as we reopen, what is the American consumer's behavior? And I, as, part of, thinking as a landlord or work for we own a lot of real estate, that's what I'm concerned about is how are our tenants going to continue to evolve and pay rent, because I don't think we're going to, what we were doing in the months prior to COVID-19, I think there's going to be it's going to take a long time to get back to a point where we're packing gyms and people are going to Orange Theory 4 times a week and, going out to dinner, every other night with their friends or whatever it may be. I just don't think that switch is going to come on. And I'm concerned right now it's easy to say, oh, this tenant is closed and we're not going to get rent from them. How do we do it? But it's like, okay, well, people are kind of open in June now. So what's really happening? What's really the story? Talking with our tenants, understanding their business. And I would say for the people on this call who own small businesses or want to know what landlords want to hear is, we want your information. We want transparency. Like, how are your sales doing? How are you recovering? What's your sort of bounce back plan, and how do you plan to rev back up, and how do you foresee that going is going to be a big question going forward.
Well, I think fortunately for that conversation, Georgia has identified itself as our test case for reopening. Yeah. How close are you and others watching kind of not necessarily the specifics, but the progression there from closure to partial opening, so on and so forth?
Oh, you mean us? Well, so I find the reopening conversation somewhat amusing, that these politicians go online or on TV and say, well, we're open and we're open for business, or we're not ready. It's like, I think that the American consumer is going to decide when they want to, jurisdictions may be able to like loosen things up. That doesn't mean people are going to just go back to the way they were doing things. I think there's a lot of sort of concern and fear of the health part of this and how that relates. And it'll be interesting. I'm sort of glad that this area is not the first area to reopen. I would be more interested in, say, like a New York, someone who's really gone through the worst of it, has a health plan in place. They're flattened the curve, or whatever you want to say, and how people really begin to go back to their lives. I've heard, rumors like they may be starting to really loosen mid-May. I know the DC area is sort of mid-May, but that could get extended. I think New York is serious about getting to some things back online because they're a little bit ahead of where we are in the DC metro area. But I really think Americans are going to decide when businesses are back open, and we're going to do it. I mean, the government can certainly loosen stuff, but I think that doesn't mean, I think people in Georgia, I've heard interviews like, I'm not opening because it's not safe enough yet. And I think that is fair, and it'll be interesting to see how it sort of unfolds.
Anthony, what are you seeing and hearing in Boston in terms of the reopening plan, just as a perspective from a different city? And by the way, since you're connected with Seattle, that might be another good case to talk about and good market to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we're not hearing much in terms of timing yet. I think it's going to be weeks before we have a plan. I agree with what Sean said. Like, this is up to the consumer. I think we're going to go in waves here. I think that this idea of just reopening and the economy is going to come back, and as soon as contraction or virus spikes, we're going to go right back to being in quarantine again. I think we have to be realistic about what this opening means, and I think as business owners we have to be realistic as well. Like, there has to be a plan in place where, hey, if you open and sales are down 50%, what's your plan? How are you going to deal with it? If you open and sales are 75%, but then 2 weeks later you got to close again, what's your plan for that? I think you've got to start sort of game planning a really flexible approach to how this is going to go here. And I think that people are going to reopen, people are going to get excited. Then I think there's going to be a spike in virus, and I think people are going to have to go back into quarantine. And until there's a vaccine, I think that's what we're going to have to deal with. And I think it's going to be spurts and starts, and it's going to be tough. But I think with that comes opportunity, and I think as long as you're prepared and understand that this isn't like, oh, the government says open, okay, great, everything's fine. Like, I don't believe that's going to happen. So.
Well, I think to Michael's point, people are paying a lot more attention to the fine print of their leases than they ever have before. It was kind of like, oh, here's the fun part, and then yada, 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 I'm going to sign at the bottom. And that's what I did when I signed my mortgage anyway. Are you seeing any of you guys those kind of contingency plans being brought into the lease language, as far as, what are your contingency plans should this return and those kinds of things? Or are those conversations happening offline and it's more of a standard lease still being issued?
I don't think it's happened yet where like new leases are being issued. We do have tenants that are asking for like deferment of paying rent because they haven't opened yet. I also think this idea, I think Michael said it, around this paying percentage rent is a really good sort of offering, where you're like, look, I can't pay rent right now, my sales aren't up, but I'll pay 6% of sales, until my sales come back. If you can get that, I think it's a great way to think about it. It's not every landlord has given that, but I think that's a great way to think about it, especially in long-term scenarios where you have a casual dining concept and you don't know when the heck you're going to open, to be able to say, look, we're in this together, Mr. Landlord. You're not finding anybody else to take 5,000 square feet in this environment. I'll be in it with you. Well, I'll pay you 6% of rent. I think it's a great solution. That's what I'm trying to do with a number of concepts. So,
Brian, I'd also want to throw in, I know we talked a lot about restaurants and retail. I think another property type that might affect some of the participants is office space. And I think the behavior and economic concerns for retail are uniquely in place for that property type, especially. Look, everybody's been using Zoom for the last 6 weeks, and people who still have jobs have been getting work done at home. I think a lot of landlords are getting a little worried that their tenants are thinking, well, gosh, maybe we don't need 4,000 square feet. Maybe we only need like 2,000. And if they're still operating, they still might be pushing on landlords to take back some space or renegotiate the lease along those lines. I think it'll be interesting to see how many people routinely telework that weren't doing it before. And frankly, just like with the restaurants, I think there's a lot of office tenants that probably aren't going to make it. And I think there's going to be real opportunities to pick up a better deal for office space if that's something that you actually need.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, you know, the trend that was already taking place with the likes of the WeWorks and the Y hotels and those kinds of things, kind of absorbing a lot of this space, I think is going to become maybe a whole nother conversation for a different call as far as office space is concerned. But I think you're absolutely right. This morning I was reminded, it was my daily dose of or daily reminder of my own ignorance. Sean, particularly for you, that there's a lot of mention and I guess a return to mentioning about triple net leases. Could you explain in you know in completely layman's terms what a triple net lease looks like and how it's being affected by this?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. So triple net is basically that there's either a gross lease, there's multiple anything, but there's a gross lease and then there's a triple net lease. There's things in between, but let's just keep it at that. Gross means you literally you pay the landlord and that covers your rent. If the landlord's got to pay property taxes, whatever, that comes all out of what's called a gross rent. A net rent basically means that you're only pay that there's your base rent, but then you are responsible on the net side. You're responsible for your proportional share of real estate taxes, building insurance. If it's a shopping center, if there's what's called common area, the parking lot sweeping, the parking lot
Dust control, all that stuff.
Just so the center looks good. And net retail is very triple net oriented. Office it's not gross. It's something in between net and gross. But when it comes also times to these rent deferrals, we're oftentimes, as opposed to if a tenant can't pay rent, we're actually asking the tenants to pay their triple nets because we're not making money, but we want to keeping up the center and making sure it's sort of we're trying to pare back expenses, but making sure shopping centers are looking good for our tenants. So when they do come back online, the place isn't falling down and people want to go back there is important. So when it comes in conjunction with these sort of lease deferment negotiations, sometimes we might defer to base rent and ask them to continue to pay their triple net expenses because we're not trying to make money, but we're also trying to keep the lights on, so to speak, to keep these centers moving. But I think you'll have a lot of tenants sort of be the opposite too. Like I can pay base rent, but I can't pay my triple nets. There'll be these fluid conversations with all of our tenants as we negotiate and try to keep people, sometimes they can pay their base rent. And a lot of times I think tenants make the mistake of not factoring the triple nets into their operating costs, so to speak. And it's important to remember if you have a triple net lease, you are then going to still have to pay common area maintenance, CAM, real estate taxes, insurance. And that can be a significant number to anyone's monthly bill.
Thank you. And I think at the end of the day, what I'm hearing from a lot of folks, and I was engaged in one of these conversations on both ends of it. There was a landlord-tenant dispute, and I knew both parties. I actually introduced them to each other. So I was speaking with them over the weekend, and I think that a lot of times there's just a basic lack of understanding between the sides. And I think that I was actually at one point last year putting together a committee of folks that were all on the tenant side, all on the landlord side, and then those who can play nicely in the middle. And then that never really came to fruition. But I think that Sean, to your point about the triple net discussion, let's not forget when in these conversations, the landlords themselves, it is a business. And in the same way that you have had to sharpen your pencil and look at all your numbers all over again, in terms of, a very diverse group of clients and a diverse group of customers, they can't just make these sweeping changes to their revenue stream, just carte blanche, in the same way that, a restaurant can't decide that, all of a sudden they're going to stop serving alcohol and absorb the cost to their revenue stream that would happen. All of their decisions as a business have been predicated upon certain assumptions in terms of revenue streams. And so they can't just willy-nilly say, all right, well, people are hurting, so we're not going to have that revenue stream anymore. You have to work with them. You have to understand it's a business on their end too. If all of a sudden they stop collecting triple net rent or triple net fees from their entire portfolio, imagine what that would do to their operating capital. And I think that just better understanding about that. I think if I'm looking for positives in this scenario, and I feel like I'm saying the same thing every week in a way, every single person in every single industry in every single city in every single country has had to revisit their business plan as a result of what's happened. And I think that the degree to which we can have successful conversations with people, and they are people with businesses in the same way that you are, the better the outcome will hopefully be for both of you. And I think that, as we approach May 1 and June 1 and beyond, and I think Anthony's concerns are very much justified, that whatever our solution is right now might be rendered irrelevant if there's a massive spike in the coming months. But just to continue, he started off by saying that it's a focus on communication, that trying to meet people where they are and over communicate, I think is going to be the path forward on all sides of this discussion. So we do try to keep these under an hour. So I thank you all very much for your time. For those that are unfamiliar with the Ciocca Center, we'll throw up a link to join our newsletter. The one request that I ask from you is that we've actually put together a survey that is very short, just asking which of our COVID-19 programs you've taken advantage of. And thank you, Rachel, just threw it up there. If you could all of you have participated in a Ciocca Center happy hour. One of these days we're actually all going to just socialize instead of having to talk about the critical topic of the day. But if you wouldn't mind just taking that survey, and also if you have any suggestions about content moving forward, please let us know, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, we are here for you, and in many cases our students are able to reap the benefits of the business relationships that we have. And if we view the COVID-19 crisis as your greatest time of need, we just hope that you remember that we were here for you now, and we tried to do our best to provide value to you, such that later on we can do our kind of standard issue of student projects and internships and all that kind of stuff. So once again, thank you very much, Anthony from Streetlight Ventures. Thank you very much, Michael Lester from Willowbrook Valuation Advisory, and to my buddy Sean Sullivan from Finmarc Management. I really appreciate it. I know I learned a lot, and I hope that each of you did as well. So next week, we will have another happy hour. We have to land a couple planes between now and then, but I hope that everybody stays healthy, stays safe, and relatively sane as best you can amidst all the challenges that we're facing right now. So thanks again, everybody, and I hope to see some of you again next week. Cheers.